This is from the website thewaythetruthandthelife.net.
This is September 7th, 2017. The purpose of this video is to help Michael Savage and anyone who views it to have a deeper insight into the meaning of life, what gives life purpose. I had two friends die about 2.5 weeks ago. One unexpectedly talked to him one day, and the next day he didn't show up, Dick Burlingoff, and I tried to call my friend Phil Morris to tell him. There was no answer. The next day I called, and Phil's brother answered, and Phil had died the night before. Phil was particularly close because I'd call him. He had been bedridden for 7 years after a hip replacement failed because of marasmus. He got an infection in the hospital, and they had to take out the replacement, and they couldn't put anything in. They couldn't deal with that marasmus infection. I guess that's the name of it. At any rate, what they're getting, an incurable infection from the hospital. At any rate, I think marasmus is the wrong name for it. At any rate, we had our home church convention where about 500 people get together for 4 days. And I sleep in the old man's quarters, which is downstairs of a large garage. Upstairs is a bunch of beds, and downstairs is for beds for the old men's quarters. Not as many beds as upstairs, but I don't know, probably 14 beds or so. At any rate, I had been helping Dick with understanding something about the meaning and purpose of life and God and all these things. Michael Savage is talking about putting out a book on this, and he lacks some of these insights, so I'll dedicate this to him. Dick, I had been witnessing to him, and he had gone from atheism to understanding you got to operationally define what you mean. People say God, and 10 different people say God, and they mean 10 different things. I explained to him how even high school science, if it's taught by investigating, that how do you know you have oxygen? How do you define oxygen? There's all these clear odorless gases. How do you know you got oxygen? What you mean by oxygen is a gas where if you take a glowing splint, that's a little piece of wood, and stick in it, it'll burst into flames. No other gas will do that. You know what you mean when you say oxygen is the gas that happens. Well, what do you mean when you say God? Well, my friend Dick Burlingoff, 90-year-old retired policeman, didn't believe in God. I asked him, what do you mean by God? He didn't really know. I said, well, you need to operationally define things, and this is what God. And I explained to him that my 4-year-old granddaughter, when my granddaughter, she's now 8, but about 4 years old, after a Sunday home meeting, we're sitting at the dining room table, and she asked me, where's God? And I told her, touch the table, touch yourself, touch the wall. God's everything. There's nothing outside of God. You're made out of his dirt. Like Paul said on Mars Hill, in God we live and move and have our being. So you're part of God. Be a good part. She said, oh, okay. She understood what you mean by God. God is everything, and we're made out of his dirt. Well, I explained that to Dick Burlingoff, and that kind of, he's always been provocative. And but he began opening up in a way that I told him how much I valued and how valuable he was. Well, a group over 40 years used to go to the Your Host restaurant, and now they all would go to Burger King in the morning for breakfast because, or a cup of coffee, because Burlinghoff was there. For the last 20 years, he's been there. I told him how valuable are. You're the stick in the mud that people can gather around. Half of the retired people come back for a visit from Florida. They know they can go and have fellowship with their old friends. They just go to where Dick Burlinghoff is. And I explained how valuable. I told him earlier I had this concept of God like some magic person sitting on a cloud throwing rocks on bad people and doing favors for good people. I told him I had asked God in my prayers, why would you create intelligent life? And I laid there. I was working in Syracuse and coming to Buffalo weekends. And I was alone in my apartment, and there it's just a sleeping room in Syracuse. And what came to my mind was solitary confinement is one of the worst things you could do. God would create life to have company, intelligent life. That was my concept of God at that time. So the meaning of life, or why life exists, is for fellowship. Okay. So I reasoned, oh, good. I went to Syracuse University and signed up for night school, Sociology 101. And I took it and I really enjoyed it. I had a good professor who had worked with the United Nations after the Second World War, dealing with problems like the orphanages and the problems. They were given in Poland, they were giving them horse meat because the children had rickets. All of the farm animals had been taken by the various army for food, and they were shipping them canned horse meat, and they weren't eating the horse meat because it was against the Catholic training. And his first job as a sociologist for the UN was to go around to these orphanages and convince the people to open up them cans and feed the kids, because it would solve the problem of rickets, the lack of the protein, I guess it is. At any rate, he had many insights, like not to deprive children of the natural experiences of things like death and illness and what have you, that they are able to assimilate those. But if you deprive children of them later on in life, they're not able to assimilate reality very well. And the example was one another professor had a little daughter of just about 3 or 4, and had bought her a puppy, and he was driving out of the backing out of the driveway, and he ran over the dog and killed it. And he come in feeling so bad and told his little 3-year-old or 4-year-old how he had backed over the puppy. And her reaction was, oh, goody, we can have a funeral. They don't have the same sense that people do about death. And there's a whole thing about education, that the children can't conserve volume to a certain age. You can teach them to memorize, but they haven't developed the intuition yet. At any rate, children need to have the natural experiences while they're able to not be traumatized by it. That's another point. So Burlinghoff was opening up and had then shared why he was anti-religious. He had been taken by his mother to some Protestant church that was indoctrinating, and a lot of hypocrisy, and he just saw the nonsense of it, that people were using it for manipulating other people, and he had turned against it. They were just using God for manipulation. Either God give me this, God give me that, or God will send you to hell with burning fire or something like that. At any rate, we got talking more. And somehow he talked about this young woman whose mother was from Eritrea. And she had come in and we were talking. And I mentioned about Eritrea. And she had to go to work. She couldn't stay. And Dick was furious with me, telling her that I had told her about her family from our Eritrea. And I had no idea that and here he felt that would hurt her because there were family problems. And that problem wasn't cured. When in between, when we had gotten to this point of conversation, I had to go for 4 days of over the 11th of August, a 4-day weekend there for our home church convention. And talking to another fella in the old men's quarters, he was lonely. His wife had left him, and I said, "What do you do?" He says, "I read my Bible, and I've got a woman doctor who's given me some pills to deal with loneliness." I said, "Why don't you get out and witness to people? Have coffee with people, talk to them. You need company." He says, "I don't want to get involved in the world." I said, "Well, you could witness to them about Christ, open up God and what God is." And so I was looking forward to getting back to talk to Dick. He was angry, and he hadn't gotten over the anger. And Thursday, we almost talked. Friday, he wasn't there. He was dead. We found out later on in the day. At any rate, I got to talk to the young lady who he was afraid I had offended because her mother come from Eritrea, and I was interested in Eritrea and their breakaway, and wondered whether it was an Islamic rebellion and so forth. It wasn't. It was just wanting independence that Eritrea had broken away. At any rate, this morning I got to talk to her. And I went through what I went through with Dick about God and the foundation of reality. And I want to share that with you. She come in. It's the first time I've seen her. She had been away. It's the first time she had been back since Dick died. She was devastated. When I told her my story about Dick and the pain I had over losing him, and that I was in the middle of showing the Reality Foundation and hadn't completed it, tears came to my eyes. These were healing tears. But I was able to go through with her. And here's how it goes. Like I said already, the foundation with my granddaughter when she was 4, she asks, "Where's God?" And I said, "You're part of God. Be a good part." And she understood. When I told them at the restaurant, one fellow said, "Yeah, well, I understand. You're saying God isn't just everywhere. You're saying God is everything." And I said, "Yes, is infinite space, matter, and motion, eternal, not created and not destroyed. Hard for us to even imagine because everything we know has a beginning and an end, and we can only travel so far. But so it's hard to us to conceive of this, our source of existence always existing. Creation is making something out of eternal matter by these eternal laws, behavioral and physical, that don't change. That at any rate, the one fellow says, "Oh, you mean God is not just God is everywhere, God is everything." And I said, "Yes." Well, I told him then about Dorina, maybe it was still 4 years old, maybe a couple weeks later, asked me, "Well, what are God's laws?" And I said, well, God's laws are eternal. They don't change. The basic laws, you need to learn them. And I said, there's physical laws about physical reality and behavioral laws about behavioral reality. Of course, they're embedded in physical reality, like your genetic behavior and so forth. But for my granddaughter, I wanted to know God's laws. We're in a 5-story high apartment on the second floor. And I said, well, for example, if you went up on top of the building and jumped off, God's laws would kill you. She said, yeah. I said, don't go out in front of a car. God's laws will kill you. She said, oh. Mm-hmm. And I said, don't stick your finger in the electric. God's laws will kill you. She said, oh, I understand. She understood. You got to learn God's laws or you could get hurt. But of course, physical and behavioral laws, and we live in a place where she has a wonderful community. We live in an apartment building. There are 4 of them around a soccer field with a playground. The Russians, I did a paper on Russian education, and I was shocked to see how much they valued children. They destroyed the family and undermined the foundation of the children, that they didn't understand how important the home, the nursing bond with the mother and all that. The women were all liberated by communism. That was one of the planks that Engels had, was women can be liberated from men. Marriage is just an invention of the powerful males, so they'll have somebody to pass on their wealth and power to. And, you know, the whole revolution was the have against the have-nots. At any rate, they're really doing a good job now, working so hard to rebuild the family and I see it. I live there 6 months of the year. The women are caring for their babies more, and the marriage is more respected. And Russia is inviting back the Russian Amish from South America. They'll give them free land for these home Christians. And I put up stuff showing the truth of the Quran, and had death threats. We reported that to the FSB. They protect us. And when strangers were hanging around the next door in our 5 entryways in our apartment building, we called the police, and they checked them out. They were Muslim, but they were just there illegally looking for work. At any rate, oh, how bad I felt. I have so much respect for the work Billy Graham did. I actually stood up at 17 in one of his St. Louis meetings. I was in the radio school at Scott Air Force Base, and went to one of his meetings. A stadium completely filled. What a wonderful man Billy Graham was in bringing Christ openness and God, us to have a relationship. But his son, the last year, canceled a Christian convention in Moscow that he had all the permits for, and he canceled it because he was supporting this hate Russia stuff that Obama started. And Obama started that because the Russians wouldn't allow the gay pride parade into Sochi Winter Olympics. They have a law, no proselytizing homosexuality in front of children. They're trying to rebuild the family. And Billy Graham's son deprived the people that would have come to hear about Christ of a convention to show his protest. Puh, screws me. At any rate, let's get on with it. So I'm talking to this young lady, and I got that far with Dick Burlinghoff. And I told her about it, and I cried. And she told me her family history and her mother and her brother, and I had the problems with a brother that used to be a bully. But then we understood we're not a single thing, we're a whole bunch of things, and we got to get them to live together, and that can be hard. Sometimes we suppress pain and lose that part of ourselves. But So I'm talking to her, and we get to the point where I could complete with her what I was going to do with Dick Burlinghoff. And I'd gone through the God's laws and this. And then I explained to her how important the child care was. That we both had problems because our mothers went to work for one reason or another before we were breastfed and run through a healthy foundation. But I wanted to give her insight that there is a genetic resentment and genetic behavior on the part of women and men, that the alpha male is resented by all the others. He dominates and beats up the boys, and he goes and rapes the girls. But yet it's the women who get raped that make the genetics for the future. So the ones that get out there and go half naked, which is a genetic behavior for every healthy young girl. It has nothing to do with sex. It's a type of behavior that got the attention of the alpha male and got to rape or sexual activity and made a baby. So the natural behavior is there for young women, and they're attracted to the invader. That's a whole nother story. I said, but Jane Goodall studying, and she knew about her studying apes. I said, I had a good friend who was an anarchist, and I didn't understand why. He was brilliant. He ended up with a PhD from University of Buffalo studying Nietzsche philosophy. He had contempt for authority. Was an anarchist, but he supported communism because even anarchists have to have some form of government. But he had contempt for Russia. He said that wasn't real communism. It was the people at the top. It was like a big corporation with the dominant people at the top. And he was right. They took over and took over all the corporations when communism was done away with. Ended up bankrupt. People invested all their money and the corporations were bankrupt, and all of a sudden ended up with more billionaire Jews in Russia than any other country in the world. And here's this Christian preacher, send money, we can help the poor Russians, Jews in Russia to immigrate to Israel. And there's a lot of the Russian Jews returned to Russia. That's a whole nother thing. But at any rate, where am I? That's the trouble getting old. I'm going to be 78 next week. And I got to go to Russia, so I got a lot of things on my mind, but I wanted to get this video done. The genetics. Jane Goodall. She discovered something else that explained my friend John and the anarchists of today that hate the authority figure, the alpha male figure. And she discovered that not only was the alpha male dominating the boys and girls of the group, the boys and girls of the group were off in the woods having sex for fun. That made genetics too, the genetics of anarchy. Of course, the boys and girls still like the dominant male when they're threatened that he would go and fight the enemy. That's a whole nother thing. Then I explained what we've discovered about genetics. Is so wonderful. We're learning God's laws more and more. When my grandma was born, we didn't have electricity. You only had running water if you were downhill from a spring. And no cars. We've learned so many of God's laws. But with genetics, we've discovered that the Roma or gypsies were the upper class, the warrior class Hindus that were driven off as they were fighting the Muslim invasions 1,000 years ago. And they went in their wagons off into the Christian areas where it was safe and riding around. They'd do odd jobs, and if nobody was looking, they'd eat the what's hanging on the trees. But that's now that's been corrupted by urbanism. There used to be a wonderful culture, no written language. It was a storytelling culture. The elders that gather around their wagons at night, and the elders would tell the stories. Wonderful. Bruno Bettelheim investigated folk tales. And when I asked him on his round when he retired, he was at the university. I went to his lecture, and I asked him, "Are you religious?" He says, "No, I'm Jewish, and I have a great deal of respect for the Old Testament." He had done, one of his books was folk tales around the Middle East and Mediterranean. He said before written language, when it was storytelling and there were communities, it was the elders that would tell the stories, and many of the stories in the Jewish Old Bible, Old Testament, are there. They were long before written language. They were the things that taught children and grandchildren. If the elders would tell these stories, like the jealous brother, Cain killed Abel, and all these stories that would help us see the different human natures and try to make it better. Okay, so he had respect for that. But then that opened the door to talk about the genetics of the hate for the alpha male. Jane Goodall discovered that the grade A mothers don't do infanticide, and they breastfeed often to the second molars, which would be equivalent to 5 or 6 years old. But human infanticide, maternal infanticide, is a historical reality. Throw them in the river, throw them off the cliff, leave them out in the woods for the animals to eat. For the Eskimos, put them on a chunk of ice and send them out to sea. Human females have a history of infanticide. Why? It's the reality is, we, about 10 million years ago, a big grassland built up in Central Africa, and large herds developed of animals eating the grass. And we learned to climb out of the trees and go running after those animals. And we learned logical speech. The hate for the alpha male is in dogs and cats, and that's bulls, cows, same thing. But it's not projected onto the infant by the mother. But it is for humans, that resentment of the alpha male, the hate for the male. Women want to get, they don't want to breastfeed, they want to get, the communism was a women's liberation thing. As I said, Engels planked there, we don't have to respect marriage, and we'll have daycare, and all the women can work, and we'll have the kids all in daycare. They cared about the children. That was the future of communism. They built the finest schools. If you go where I live in Russia, every block there's a playground for the kids, and they had fine schools, and teachers were respected. I did a master's in education project on Russian education, and I was shocked. They valued children, but they didn't understand how important the maternal nursing bond was, and they deprived them of that and destroyed their culture. As I say, they're trying to rebuild it. But here's the reality. With logical speech, humans learned that the baby is a product of the rape. The man made the baby. For the animals, it just happens 3 months, 6 months later, whatever. But human females learned the baby came from the man, and their hatred for the man, because of the millions of years of violence and rape, was projected onto the child. Now, there is the maternal instinct there too. Remember, we're not an entity, we're a group. And that part is still there, but it's in conflict with narcissism. And narcissism is a normal stage of development. That's the first stage. Every little baby goes, and then you need to run around and change their diaper and give them food, and all they give you is poop back. And you love them if you're a healthy parent. And you breastfeed them if you're a healthy, mammalian, capable mother. Not many. You can't take a woman raised in daycare and expect her to have a healthy maternal nursing bond. A woman across the street from my mother's, she was at the Mormon. She had converted to Mormonism, her and her husband. She had a baby and she wanted to be a good mother in such a way, but she was too stressed. You can look at my video on from New York University on the problems with infant bonding. But her baby was dying from what they call, well, it used to be called marasmus, infant atrophy. And she went to the doctor. The baby's suffering in terrible condition, diarrhea and vomiting. And he said, can't you find somebody to help you? And she's filled with stress. She had been raised in daycare. But she said, can't you find somebody to help you raise the baby? My mother lived across the street. This was in Clarence, New York, out on a country road. But and my mother loved children. She had 5. She had been a teacher. And so she took the baby during the day. The baby calmed down. The baby started eating and thriving. By the end of the summer, the baby was healthy and thriving. It isn't that she didn't want to care for her child. She had been deprived. Wake up. You don't dump girls in daycare and then expect them to be healthy as mothers, as human beings that can propagate the race. Wake up. At any rate. So I explained to this young woman what I would have explained to Dick if he was still alive, that we discovered, we can even by genetics know the tribe. There's still the genetic background of a group in Africa that we can connect, especially through the female mitochondria that's only passed on from the female to female. But that's another thing. So that's the source of all the abortion and not wanting the baby. And it's important that we have babies raised healthy. My uncle was a mink farmer in Pennsylvania, and the secret of being successful as a mink farmer was choosing the mothers well. The ones who were not able to give a good bond to their infants, the infants were given to another mother that would wean them to save them, and she was made for the same as the extra males. But the ability to be a good mother depends on having one that had good care. Just like how to live to be in old age. You choose your parents well. Okay, so then I explained to her this, we have this background with all this infanticide, human nature, associating the hatred for the alpha male or the hatred for the man. Both men and women have this, as I explained with anarchy. But unless there's stress and a threat, then they want the alpha male to protect them. At any rate, I explained to her how even in Pakistan, one of the biggest charities in the cities is a charity Pakistan is Muslim. They don't allow abortion or birth control. And one of the biggest charities in the cities is going around picking the dead babies out of the garbage to give them a decent burial. So this history of killing babies goes all the way back. The god Moloch, that statue of him with his arms stretched out, and the priest would build a fire under his arms, and they'd play the drums. All the women put their babies in his arms, and they'd tumble down into the fire. They'd play the drums so you wouldn't hear the baby screaming. And it's a Jewish tradition says Abraham's father made idols. The women would sacrifice their babies to that they were able to afford idols. They'd have them to worship and sacrifice their babies to many times. And that's the secret. That's human background. Look at the gift, the archetype of Abraham. Abraham set an example. Like God told him to sacrifice your son, but then God changed his mind and gave him an animal to sacrifice. And that set aside the special people. God's chosen people do not sacrifice their children. They use an animal. That's what started the Jewish special people, Abraham's legacy. What a wonderful thing. Special people who don't sacrifice their babies. A culture like that. But then they had trouble with a drought, and they went to Egypt and stayed there. Their slavery wasn't slavery like abuse. They had private homes and everything. They just had to work for their food and had no control, freedom to go. But in Egypt, the Pharaoh could say, kill this one, kill that one, had a bunch of babies killed, could do whatever he wanted. So then along comes Moses after a few hundred years and leads them out of their bondage and has these laws that even the king or the Pharaoh who kills a baby is to be executed. These laws of behavior: don't lie, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't murder. And even Pharaoh is executed if he violates it. Now, that's another thing. And Moses set up a priesthood to teach these folk tales, which were written down then, and the laws, God's laws of behavior for developing a healthy society, like don't kill your babies, and the care of the mother for the child. But this alpha male instinct takes over priests, pastors, whatever. So some male is in charge, it attracts, or a surgeon or a dentist attracts alpha male behavior. The Nazi concentration camps were set up by psychiatrists that had been killing their disabled patients. That's a whole nother thing. The killing the young Turks that exterminated all them Armenians. The Young Turks was an organization born of the upper class in the medical university in Turkey. Just like the Muslim Brotherhood was born in the medical university in Cairo, where Obama went and invited the Muslim Brotherhood and set up the murders. The liberals and the Muslim Brotherhood worked together then, and then the poor liberals found out the Muslim Brotherhood was going to cut their head off if they don't behave. That's a whole nother thing. Alpha male attraction, like to the police. You got to be careful. So the alpha males took over the priesthood. You got to come to us. We'll go to God for you. We, the Holy of Holies, we go inside the veil once a year. You got to bring us your money and your produce. So then, that's step one. Don't kill your babies. Step two, everybody, including the king, is held responsible. And number three, Jesus came and said, you can go directly to God. You don't have to go through the priest. You can be forgiven. And the priests had the Romans kill him for that. And his blood frees us. He was willing to give his life. Such love. And what did he teach for God's behavioral laws? Love the Lord thy God. That's your source of existence, everything around you and the people and everything. Love God with all the heart and soul and mind. Use your life to be a good part. And love your neighbor as yourself. That means you should love yourself. And that means outgrowing narcissism. But you can't do that if you didn't have a healthy foundation. If you look at all those children Ceausescu had in Romania, he had made a law against abortion and birth control, and he said the government, he was trying to rebuild the population under communism. They were killing all their babies, and the population was going down. Well, when they finally had the rebellion against him and executed him and his wife, here's all these orphanages with the baby banging their head on the wall and not even able to be narcissistic. I had the Needs of Children seminar, which you can find on a video that I posted on that. But the stages of development, the psychiatrist, Bruno Schuttkecker. I don't know how I got to be friends with him. He's the only psychiatrist that ever ordered a lobotomy at Buffalo Veterans Hospital. He had been, I think, in charge of the Buffalo Psychiatric Center too at one point. But he loved to talk, and he had a lot of knowledge, and so I was organizing the Needs of Children seminar. I included him, and he explained what they taught at NYU back when he was going to the university. Narcissism is the first stage of human development, and if they have a healthy foundation of the narcissism respected, then the next stage is homoerotic. Boys like boys and girls like girls, and that's normal. And if they have a healthy foundation, when puberty comes around, then they're attracted to the opposite sex. And if they have a healthy foundation, they mate. And all of this is selfish. They love themselves. They love their friends like them. They love the opposite sex because they get something out of it. And then if they really enjoy each other and they have a baby and they care about the baby as a product of their care for each other, it's the first level of non-selfish love. What's the name for that? Love unselfishly. I've got it on my website. At any rate, at my age, it's hard to remember things. So this unselfish level of love. And then if you work hard enough to get a home, and if you've sacrificed for it, not if it was given to you, but if you've worked for it, you value it, give them a home, and then you care about the schools and the neighborhood, and so forth. The levels of love, you can find that too. You go from caring about your children to caring about the schools and the neighborhood to caring about the world of work and war they're going out into. And we need to have adult couples as the authority figures, couples that are vetted, first of all, that they have to have raised children, that are able to raise children. They need to be grandparents with that by their fruits you shall know them. Not a good man or a good woman, but a good couple that have the intuition and insight, and let them be the judges and the politicians and the lawmakers, and stop this nonsense and rebuild the family and protect the healthy development of human beings. But at any rate, in God we live and move and have our being. That's my story. That's what I didn't get to finish with Dick. That the purpose of life is fellowship, and what gives it meaning is the fruit we bear. What do we leave in our children and our grandchildren, in what we've invented, in the love we've given to older people that they've been able to share with others? And that's what gives life purpose. And that's why I'm working on my website. I hope I can get somebody to take it over before I die, that it doesn't just get lost. But I better get back to work. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time with others and to communicate with them. I pray that the archetype of Abraham would be understood and reinstated as the special people that don't kill their babies. I understand euthanasia of a baby in the womb that is going to have a life of suffering, but to kill healthy babies, Lord, it's a crime that needs to be prosecuted, and need to prevent the unwanted births. And we need to promote wanted births with healthy genetics, with a mother that's able to care for the child, and a father that's able to supply the needs and protect the home, and bring the care and discipline that the foolishness of narcissism doesn't invade the home. I pray for these things. Thank you for Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and all in between, that we try to make a better world for our children, our grandchildren, in the future. May we succeed in even freeing ourselves from this planet before it's destroyed, and spreading what Jesus said throughout the universe. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. That is, love our source of existence, and work together for good. In Jesus' name I ask. Okay, folks, I'm going to publish this. I hope that it's helpful. As I say, with Michael Savage publishing a book on God, here's God for you, my operational definition of him. He's everything, infinite and eternal, matter, space, and motion. Not created, not destroyed. Just go to my website. You can find the derivation of gravity without all the relativistic garbage and babble from the university in there. I have a degree in mathematical physics. I had a wife and 3 children and a dog by the time I got my degree, and I was working in carborundum research, and then went to teaching physics by Harvard Project Physics, where the students learn by experiment. What a joy! I just got started teaching, and my wife took my home, my lovely 3 children, 6, 7, and 8, and my income. I was heartbroken. I read in the Bible where it said, wine and strong drink is for the broken man. Let them drink and forget. So I'd go off for cocktails with the teachers after school, and then I'd go to dancing at 3 Coins, or a nightclub, with some other teachers. I did that for a year and a half, and then I went to the Unitarian Church because I saw people destroying themselves. But it's a rough road, but I've been able to keep building, and I just pray for the website that I'm able to get something finished, or that other people will take it over and build on it, correct it. That's my hope. Okay, that's it, folks. I wish you well. Bye-bye. This is the ending message. This is the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life.
These are the guest rooms in our 3 homes, New York, Florida, and Russia. They are prepared for those messengers that Jesus prayed for in Luke chapter 10. And he gave them the instructions. Reading from Luke chapter 10, verse 1. After these things the Lord appointed 70 other also, and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. As Jesus said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. Verse 2, therefore he said unto them, the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into the harvest. This is Jesus praying for more servants and asking us to do the same. Verse 3, go your ways. Behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. Verse 4, carry neither purse nor scrip nor shoes, and salute no man on the way. Verse 5, and into whatsoever house ye enter, first say, peace be to this house. Verse 6, and if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall return unto you again. Verse 7, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. Verse 8, and into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you, eat such things as they set before you. Verse 9, and heal the sick that are therein, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 10, but into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you not, go your way out into the streets of the same, and say, verse 11, even the very dust of your city, which cleaves on us, we wipe off against you. Notwithstanding, be ye sure of this, that the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 12, but I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable in that day for Sodom than for that city. In closing, remember Matthew 18, verse 20, where Jesus said, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them.